Part of the reason you buy the iPhone, whatever number we're blindly, is because you know and trust the brand. And if Apple tomorrow introduced, I don't know, I'm looking around, a new lampshade, I guarantee you people will, just because it's got the Apple logo on it and they know Apple and they associate with certain things, they will assume that's going to be the lamp that, right? And I was so pleased that literally about a month ago, I was in a meeting in my current organization, and I've always prided myself on building diverse teams. And I always talk about it here publicly and privately and always. And somehow I ended up on a leadership panel and we were all men. Now it was so stark. I didn't even realize it. I was there and the compare was female. She was doing a great job. And then somebody asked a question and it came up on the screen behind us. And there was a lot of whispering and I looked and I was like, thank you so much for calling it out.
Some conversations don't just stay with you for a moment. They linger, they provoke thought, and they resonate far beyond the recording studio. The last time I had the privilege of sitting down with Uday, the response was overwhelming. Thousands of listeners from across the world reached out to say how deeply his reflections on leadership, humility, and impact resonated with them. Cultural insensitivity, wrong tone, or irrelevant content. One funny example that comes to mind is when KFC was launching in China back in 1980s. They translated their slogan into Chinese, which is "eat your fingers off." There's another example of Pepsi. When they launched in Taiwan, they wanted to say "come alive with Pepsi generation," and that was translated as "Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the dead." Funny in hindsight, but costly.
One of my best leaders gave me this very, very simple task. He asked me to close my eyes. So close your eyes and I will say cow to you. And I want you to describe, so you can open your eyes now.
Right.
And when I said cow, what did you see?
A white big animal with two horns.
Exactly.
And 4 legs.
Two more. You saw a bull, but that's okay. But you visualize, right?
Yes.
You didn't see the letters C-O-W.
No. Oh,
You created a visualization
no,
of
sugar. It wasn't just another industry conversation. It was a window into the heart and mind of one of the most respected leaders in pharmaceuticals. And today we are so glad to say that he's back with us on Diaries. And this time, we're going even deeper.
So if I was CEO for a day, and I only have a day because that's as much as I'll get. But if there was one decision I could make, that would be the decision.
Before we jump into today's episode, I just want to say something from the heart. Over 93% of the people who watch this podcast regularly haven't subscribed. And listen, I get it. Life is busy. You click, you watch, you move on. But if you've ever felt like this show brings you value, if it has made you think, sparked a new idea, introduced you to something inspiring, then I have a small favor to ask. Please hit that subscribe button. It might not seem like much, but to me, it means everything. This podcast has always been a labor of love. No sponsors, no script, just honest conversations with people trying to make a difference in the world of healthcare. And your support, your one click, helps me keep doing that. It helps more people discover these voices. It helps this community grow. So if you're here, if you believe in this, please consider subscribing. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the episode. Some conversations don't just stay with you for a moment. They linger, they provoke thought, and they resonate far beyond the recording studio. The last time I had the privilege of sitting down with Uday, the response was overwhelming. Thousands of listeners from across the world reached out to say how deeply his reflections on leadership, humility, and impact resonated with them. It wasn't just another industry conversation. It was a window into the heart and mind of one of the most respected leaders in pharmaceuticals. And today we are so glad to say that he's back with us on Diaries. And this time we are going even deeper. We'll explore how leadership is evolving from traditional command and control to shared leadership that breaks silos and builds interdependence. We'll discuss the fine balance between global standardization and local tailoring in strategy, technology, and content. We'll dive into the changing role of customer experience in pharma and healthcare. And we'll also talk about a topic that's really very close to his heart: diversity, equity, and inclusion, including his personal mission to challenge the status quo and create a future where opportunities aren't defined by gender. This isn't just another conversation about pharma. It's about leadership, culture, and purpose in a world where all three are being tested like never before. I couldn't be more excited to welcome back my guest, a leader I deeply admire, Uday Bose. Uday, welcome to Drug Diaries.
Thank you so much, Kaushik. Lovely to be back, and thanks for the wonderful introduction, as always.
Hi, Shah. Thank you. I'm so honored to have you back here. So, to begin with, research by Deloitte suggests that companies with strong cultural functional collaboration are 50% more likely to outperform peers financially. And yet, most organizations still reward individual success over collective progress. And I remember you mentioned that you had a chance to survey over 200 colleagues to understand this better. And I find that fascinating because most leaders don't stop to ask, what did you learn from that exercise about shared leadership and knowledge sharing?
So yeah, maybe a bit of the background, Kaushik. So I'm studying, actually, on top of the other things that I do. I've taken on a doctorate degree at Durham University in Lyon. And my thesis, when it came to choosing my thesis topic, I felt what better forum to consider than the life sciences industry, which has served me so well. And I've worked in this sector coming up to 30 years. Well, no, not that many, maybe 20 plus years. And this phenomenon that I've observed, which is our Achilles heel in this industry, is around drug development. The vast majority of the innovations that we research don't make it to the market. And the model, therefore, is one where we have very, very high attrition rates, one of the highest attrition rates of any sector. And we've poured billions into research to try and accelerate research, improve research. You hear about quantum computing and other technologies that have been applied. But everything I've seen has really focused on the clinical aspects of improving attrition rates. But I was inspired by the course I'm on and one of the modules that I was on around leadership and followership. And it made me ask the question of myself, that do we really consider leadership and the role that leadership has in terms of this dilemma, this concept of attrition rates? So what I did, to your point, I did design a research study. And obviously, in the company I work with, I had fantastic support from leadership. And I basically surveyed teams, asset teams that are working on these molecules at different stages of their life cycle to understand how they're working. So how do they work as a team? How effective are they as a team in terms of the collaboration, the cross-functional collaboration, to the Deloitte point? And specifically what the literature pointed me towards, that is in knowledge-based sectors like life sciences, a typical hierarchical leadership actually doesn't work well. It doesn't correlate well to performance. In knowledge-based sectors, the sharing of information, the sharing of knowledge in a much more fluid way tends to lead to better outcomes. So this is proven. There is empirical data on this phenomenon. And I wanted to understand, is that how our teams are working in the organization that I surveyed? So yeah, 200 plus people, very high response rate. I was really taken aback by how well engaged people were. I think it's a question everybody wants to answer. And I also had a survey with the leaders of these teams. So a smaller group of leaders, because obviously ultimately I want to understand how effective are these teams. So how do the teams work and how effective are they? So you've caught me at a good time. I'm literally running the analysis at the moment.
Right.
Some preliminary findings that I'm seeing, some trends in the data, is what we can discuss. And first of all, it is clear that teams that have a shared leadership approach are much better at sharing knowledge. The environment, the ecosystem is much more comfortable for them to share knowledge. And this is important because what I notice in the sector is, to your point, each individual siloed function has a specific part to play in the puzzle. The outcome we're all looking for is bringing this medicine to the patient. And if you look at it from an incentives perspective, that should be the common incentive. But most pharma companies are not organized like that. So you have the preclinical team doing their work, and then they kind of hand over the baton to the next group, and then so on and so on. I remember in a large organization I used to work in, for example, regulatory rightly celebrating the submission. It's a huge milestone. A dossier submission is a huge task, and to complete it is a celebration. But I was in market access at the time, and I thought, wow, this is just the beginning of what's going to be a very arduous journey, because that data package now, once we get the approval from EMEA, we then in parallel need to speak to HTA. There's another dossier we need to do. And we may never get the drug to the patient because of this profile that we have, this product. So I felt kind of, I didn't want to, rain on the parade, but it was, we work in silos, we have different incentives and objectives. And if we're all pulling in different directions, therefore, it kind of falls down where you think about why are the attrition rates what they are? Because I think my hypothesis is people are not pulling in the same direction in terms of the ultimate goal.
Right. And when people are asked what makes a great leader, they often use words like visionary, decisive. But today, especially post pandemic, we are seeing a shift. People want leaders who are human, who listen, who admit mistakes.
Yep.
And one survey showed that 80% of employees say empathy is key to retention. Has your definition of leadership shifted over time?
Very, very much so. I think when I started out, and we are always really shaped by the leaders that we work with. And I think early on in my career, I had leaders who, and I observed other leaders as well, who they just, there's had this, and this is another form of leadership. It's charismatic leadership, right? People who lead based on their own personality, their traits,
Yes.
and their charisma. What I noticed immediately was the authenticity was often missing, and that vulnerability of saying that this didn't work the way I planned it to, and I'm okay with that. I just didn't see that in the leaders I was around. Shaped me. So that made me think that maybe we don't talk about these things. Maybe we just talk about the positives. And there's loads of positives to talk about. But as I matured as a leader, I realized my biggest learning opportunities were where things didn't go to plan. That's actually where you double down on the learning. That's where you take a lot from. So yeah, my own personal leadership has evolved a lot. I'm much more candid and open in terms of things not working out. I think that there's a couple of things. Number one, it's a learning and it's a positive thing, because it helps others hopefully avoid. Um, I wouldn't say necessarily mistakes, but learnings, right? Things that
Yes.
they don't need to go through. But also, I think that vulnerability is important for people to see that's real, that happens. I'm so pleased that you accepted that not everything you plan goes to plan because it doesn't. And being able to talk about that is important. That's a cultural topic.
Right. And you mentioned about hierarchy, and hierarchy was once seen as essential to order. But increasingly in industries like tech and healthcare, we are learning that it can kill creativity. Ideas get lost in layers. I read a stat recently that 70% of employees feel their ideas never reach the top. Do you think hierarchy is holding us back in pharma? And if so, what's the alternative?
And definitely going back to the research I'm doing and what I've observed myself. So I used to sit on a cross-functional leadership group. I was a marketing representative, and alongside me there were people from clinical development, from early research, translational research, market access. It's a wonderful cross-functional team. And we would be making decisions about assets as they came forward. So we used to have, I remember them vividly, we would call them challenge meetings where the asset team, the brand teams would come and present where they are with the program, and it's for us as a cross-functional team to challenge them, not in a critical way, but in a constructive way, of course. And I remember vividly, again, it goes back to my earlier point that people are not, just because of the way we're designed, are pulling in different directions. Not consciously, people aren't consciously trying to undermine other functions, but obviously they have a focus. And for me as a commercial person, I was often in a situation where I had a deluge of data telling me how unique this molecule was. The mechanism of action, it's a first in class, it's breakthrough designation, especially in the area of oncology. We had phase 1 trials, 20 patients showing a remarkable shrinkage of a brain tumor, for example. And you think this is incredible efficacy. This is something that's so powerful. The dose responses are incredible, well tolerated. So it looks really good. And I'm asking, but I'm going to need more data to convince regulators, to convince payers. And to be fair, there are other products on the market at a fraction of the price that this is going to be. What's the value story here? And often this becomes quite difficult because from a scientific perspective, you are designed to bring scientific breakthrough innovation to a market. From a marketeer's perspective, I'm there to bring blockbuster brands to the market. I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. I
Hmm.
think we're both doing the same thing. We're both trying to do the same thing because the power of that science is only there if it's combined with the power of patients getting access to it and then fulfilling its potential. But that was, I had a fantastic team I worked with. So we were all understanding that. We were having good conversations about that. There were many instances where I would cede ground to say, okay, I buy that. Let's just make sure in the pivotal trial, you design it in a way that mechanistic translates into a clinical outcome. Because then we've got something to differentiate it with. And that's kind of the discussions we would have. So, but I know from peers and colleagues who worked in other situations, it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes you sacrifice a certain endpoint, certain outcomes to be able to definitively show how, the science of this molecule is so outstanding. You may get the NEJM publication, but you may not necessarily get the prescriptions. And that's ultimately what we're here for, prescriptions, patients, and not necessarily this is difficult to say, but this is the truth. There are some fantastic NEJM publications out there, but not all
Yes.
of them translate into meaningful products for patients. And that's where you have to decide what we're here to do.
Right. And you mentioned about vulnerability. What does vulnerability in leadership look like to you? And how do you balance that with decisiveness?
So I think for me, it's having the confidence to ask questions
Mm.
and not offer answers all the time. I think sometimes when you're sitting in the chair as a leader, and if I'm chairing a meeting of a leadership team, my leadership team today, previous ones, I think there's always a tendency for people to look to you for the answer, for the decision. Okay, so we've had a good discussion. Where are we looking now? Boss, what's the position? And what I've found is it's actually good sometimes to say, I don't know. I'm divided on this one as well. I think the discussion has been really good, and I don't think we're landing on a particular decision. And I've been in situations where I've had leaders who have felt that, but have still felt the need to make a decision. So they make a decision, but you can tell they're not vested in the decision. It's like I've tried to resolve it because we had to move forward. And I think vulnerability for a leader is also to be candid and honest, to say that this is not something that I can address. I do need some more information. It goes to your topic about speed.
Mm.
Sometimes the right decision is to take time. Sometimes it is. Because again, I keep coming back to our currency in life sciences it's not a joke. It's lives. These are patients. Can you imagine making a rush decision on a molecule that somebody spent like 10 years developing? You shouldn't rush decisions like that, because
Yeah.
the potential of making the wrong decision is severe. It's a significant taking a pause, taking advice internally, externally. Very, very important. Very, very important for leaders to acknowledge that they may not be the only or the decision in the room. There may be other people to play. Patients in particular, I find, give you an opportunity to really question some of the decisions you're making, and I think you and I spoke. I was in a publicly traded company years ago where it's an oncology drug, fantastic product, and the secondary endpoint, which was a progression-free survival endpoint,
Mm.
achieved. It hit the target, which was wonderful. The independent data monitoring committee at the time, they said, we see this, we see the results. Our advice is not to unblind the trial because your primary endpoint is survival. You should keep it blinded, keep pursuing it. But we had so much pressure on the organization at the time to disclose it because it's publicly traded. This is significant. This has what we would call material impact.
Yes.
So it was decided to unblind it, keep the trial running, but unblind it. So you could still show the survival benefit. We did show the survival benefit, but there were certain people, including regulators, who criticized us to say, by unblinding it so early, you've actually compromised the quality of that endpoint.
Mm.
Decision was made, right? And at that time, interestingly, we did ask the patient organization. So our structure in that company, we had a patient advocacy group on the steering committee, which was brilliant. We were one of the first companies to do that. And it was interesting. The patient also said, if unblinding it means people will know about this and can start accessing this, unblind it. Whatever you need to do to get this to patients, you should do it. So you would argue from a company perspective, we followed the advice of the patient. But I think in doing that longer term, again, with my marketing hat on, if I had the survival benefit and the regulatory stamp
Yes.
on that in a positive way, we probably could have pushed it harder and got to more patients.
That's a great example. And Uday, coming to the topic of customer experience. So customer experience has long been associated with retail like Amazon, Apple, Starbucks. But in healthcare, as you rightly said, the stakes are higher.
Hmm.
And poor experience doesn't just mean a loss hit, it can mean a mistreatment. And McKinsey recently reported that pharma companies focusing on CX see double the patient adherence rates. So, what's triggered this shift in how our industry approaches CX or customer experience?
I think it's this recognition that CX matters. It matters to us, you and I, all of us as consumers. We are every day experiencing a service, some offering from an organization that's trying to sell something to us, right? We know what good CX is. We also know what bad CX is. And I've always found it strange that something happens when there was an old manager of mine that used the analogy that we have green gates at the front of the building. And he goes, something happens when people come through those green gates, they completely forget that they are also customers. They are also patients. Is this how you would want to be treated? Is this how you would want to be regarded? No. So keep that with you as you come into the building. Keep that with you. And I think over the years, this has become more and more obvious. I think if you take something like cancer. So when I started in the industry, I think it was 1 in 7, 1 in 8. It was still scarily high. I think the most recent data, 1 in 2. So, I mean, it's just you and I are on this call. There's 2 people on this call. The data would tell you the probability is high that one of us, sadly, God forbid, will face this in our lifetime. And it's just relentless. These diseases, these conditions are relentless. So I think this is forcing us as life sciences companies, pharma companies, to understand this is much more personal than it's ever been. And therefore, we have to be more personalized in our approach to it. And when I started in pharma, one of the dilemmas I faced early, because I started my career in Procter & Gamble. P&G had a small pharmaceutical part, but I was so blown away by Procter & Gamble's approach to consumer marketing. But I always found but it didn't really translate into the pharma side. And the excuse was always, well, pharma is much more heavily regulated. You could never have somebody who managed the toothpaste brand working on a pharma brand. And I thought P&G were very progressive. They disagreed with that completely. They said, wrong. If you understand consumers, you can be anywhere in this organization. And I love that approach. But it kept coming back to, oh, it's a very heavily regulated. We can't. It's a reality.
Yes.
Real customer is not somebody in most markets that I can communicate with directly. So the patient who derives the greatest value benefit of the pharmaceutical product is in most markets not a subject for my direct promotion. US you can, but the majority of markets you can't. So I'm actually working through somebody else. So I'm trying to convince a prescriber on the value, and this for me was a perennial issue in oncology. What does an additional 3-month survival benefit mean? I lost count of the number of professionals in healthcare who pushed me and my company to say, 3 months, is it worth it? Is it worth it? Now you ask a patient who's been given, a life sentence in terms of this is how long you have, and you ask them, what does 3 months mean? And then you'll appreciate the value. So as a patient, I would absolutely take 3 months. 3 months gives me a chance to have some special memories with my wife, with my kids, to see certain things, to achieve certain things. You can't put a price on 3 months for me as a patient. But I can see it from a payer's perspective or from a government perspective that it's 3 months. I mean, what can you do?
Yeah.
So this is a challenge for us in pharma, but that's why we have to work harder. Marketers, brand teams in pharma, we have to work harder because the benefit we have is not something that the purchaser feels. So you have to be even more convincing to make them feel compelled to give this to the patient. That's why I find this to be one of the hardest, but also one of the most fulfilling careers to have working in life sciences.
Right. And one of the fascinating facts that I came across recently is that every company says that it's customer centric or patient centric, but let's say customer centric. Bain and Company's research showed that while 80% of CEOs believe they deliver a superior customer experience, only 8% of customers actually agree. And that's a huge gap. What do you think most companies are missing?
I think it's I mean, that's a startling statistic, right? So just to revisit it, 80% think they're doing it, and only 8% are actually doing it from the patient's or the customer's perspective. So that's pretty stunning. It's worth pausing on that. I think, and I've seen similar data. It's the evidence, it's the insights, it's where you're looking, right? It's being brave. It goes back to one of the first questions you asked in terms of vulnerability. It's about being brave enough to ask the question. Where is this customer satisfaction data coming from? Who's answering that? Is it the direct recipient? Is it a surrogate? Where are we asking the question? I think this is where the disconnect is. I think often we're asking the question on, and I've seen some of the surveys which you're asking, which I'm thinking that's just you have to go that extra. You always have to ask that extra additional question. So I'll give you a real example in an organization I work with. It's not about what you're asking, but the CRM system, the customer relationship management system, a standard for all of us in life sciences. And a survey was done on user satisfaction. So I've been a rep. So I'm legitimately, you can ask me this question. So if you ask me the question, what's your level of satisfaction with the CRM system? I would say, as did the sample that I'm referring to, 80, 90% plus satisfaction. Love it. It's great. It's fine. And that's great. Everybody's happy. You can all say, wow, job done, job ticked. If you ask the question, what is the purpose of the CRM system? And then tell them if the purpose of the CRM system is to make you more effective in your customer interactions and to drive your performance, your sales performance, now rate it 10%, 5%.
Really?
I don't need this. This doesn't help me sell more product. So what is the purpose of the system? I would believe, and my belief then was, it's to fulfill a reporting requirement for head office. So head office know that they said do 9 calls a day, and I'm doing 9 calls a day. And in that context, it's 10 out of 10. It does that. I put in the call, it churns out how many calls I did. Very satisfied with it. That's what it is. But when I tell them, no, the real reason we invest so much in the CRM system is for insights, to help us be better with our customers, to learn, to share, to execute, to deliver, to track, to monitor, to be better. No, I don't see that. So this is an example of the question you're asking.
Yeah.
So that 80% and that 8%, I think if you ask them generically, is it okay? Yeah, it's okay. It's like vanilla. It's fine. Will I walk across the world to get it? No, it's vanilla. So I think it's very important to ask that additional question, especially on CX. CX is something which you have to be very specific of the question you're asking and of whom you're asking it and when, the channel through which you're asking it, because by definition, CX is highly personalized. So
Yeah.
you cannot ask a generic question of a general group
Mm.
and aggregate an answer on CX. It's completely counterintuitive. CX has to be as personalized as you can get it, which is why I love CX data, where we are getting into focus groups, we're talking to individuals, we're monitoring actual activity. So the more real you can make it, the better for CX, for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. I agree. And I was looking at a report recently that showed global pharma launches are 2 to 3 times more successful when they are locally adopted.
Hmm.
And yet the pressure to streamline, to do things one way across regions is higher than ever. How do you navigate that balance between consistency and local nuance?
Well, how long have we got? So that's so I've been on both sides. So I've been on the receiving end. So one of my first roles was a product manager. So I was very lucky. So I've been on the receiving end of global blockbuster products and global strategy and execute that. I've also been on, because I used to work in the UK, I've been on the receiving end of a product that had a global strategy, was rejected by NICE, and therefore pretty much global just said, do what you want. You don't have access in that market anyway. And then I was able to do more local nuancing and tailoring. So I've worked in both kind of ecosystems. I think it's a fallacy, I think personally, that they are two different things. I think you can be globally aligned and still have localization. I don't think it's a binary choice. And I think far too often people look at it as either I follow the global strategy or I do my local thing. A good global strategy should be able to address the needs of the majority of the markets. Most companies nowadays consciously prioritize the US. It's the biggest market. It's the biggest pharmaceutical market. But what I try and do is, again, let's go back to the patient, go back to the customer. So does a patient with stage 4 breast cancer, are their needs fundamentally different in the US or in India? When you really look at what they're looking for from a treatment. And similar from a physician's perspective, I think when you start looking into ecosystems and healthcare systems, yes, absolutely, there are differences. But in terms of value proposition, product positioning, there are opportunities for a more standardized approach. And that I find, again, having worked in both local and global, is critically important. The more you can standardize, the more effective you can be. And we see this in the examples that you gave with some of the biggest brands that we know, right?
Yes.
Part of the reason you buy the iPhone, whatever number we're on, blindly is because you know and trust the brand. Yeah?
Yes.
And if Apple tomorrow introduced, I don't know, I'm looking around, a new lampshade, I guarantee you people will, just because it's got the Apple logo on it and they know Apple and they associate with certain things, they will assume that's going to be the lamp to have, right? So branding does matter. It is important. And Pharma is no different. Pharma is no different in terms of a value proposition and a brand proposition and positioning. And I think that's incredibly important. So I've worked on some phenomenal brands which have had very strong global steers. And I've also worked on brands where there's been a lot of deviation on that. And you really get to see that when you sit in a global role, but also when you go to congresses, when you go to meetings. These people speak to each other. Physicians speak to each other, experts speak to each other. Patients now online, communities are speaking to each other. So it's actually a disservice to them ultimately if your positioning is very, very different, right? Because ultimately a patient gets confused in terms of, well, hang on, is this a product for this or is it that? Does it have that feature or does it not? These are important considerations if you look at it from the customer's perspective.
Right. And I think we've all seen global campaigns that fall flat, whether it's cultural insensitivity, wrong tone, or irrelevant content. And one funny example that comes to mind is when KFC was launching in China back in 1980s. They translated their slogan into Chinese, which is, I think it was in English, it's finger licking good.
That's it.
So in Chinese, it came out as eat your fingers off. And there's another example of Pepsi. And when they launched in Taiwan, they wanted to say, come alive with Pepsi generation. And that was translated as Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the dead. So funny in hindsight, but costly.
Yeah, absolutely.
What mistakes do you see in pharma when scaling strategies globally?
So you're right to look at the execution examples. Campaign execution is often where I've seen it manifested itself. I recently challenged, imagine launching a product without a brand, without a campaign. Of course, with a brand, without a campaign. Why not? Why would you not consider that? Because when you think about it, because when I started again, you would win awards, right? You'd go to evening events to win awards for the best creative. And I've been blessed. I've worked with some fantastic agencies and I've been on the stage winning some of these awards with this incredible creative. But now with hindsight, all these years later, I'm thinking, you know what, that just makes me feel kind of awful. Actually, there wasn't a patient in the room. This wasn't about how successful the product is. Nobody really cared for what it did. They just were basic. It's like in a gallery. It's a beautiful visual. Here's an award. That's not what we should be doing. I don't regret because this is all learnings. But today, I find when I'm interviewing marketeers, I'm not asking questions about their creative awards. I'm asking them questions about customer type, segmentation targeting. How do you develop a brand positioning, different channels that you're using? How do you deal with healthcare system reform? These are questions that marketers in my generation would like. Why are you asking me? That's not, here, let me show you my portfolio of images. So things have really, moved on quite dramatically. And I think that's one of the areas where products have too much attention on the creative versus the substance. What does this product represent in terms of value to the healthcare system, to the patient? And I personally would find it very refreshing to launch a product without a campaign. I think there's a reason why, and I learned this very early on when I spoke to opinion leaders, there's a reason why when they present scientific data, it's on a blue screen, blue slide with white text, because your focus should be on the data, on the product there, not on the visualization, the colors. I've lost count of the hours I've lost in my life arguing with people, senior leaders, about campaign aspects. Why is it that color? Why can't it be a different font? That image looks too aggressive. This image doesn't work in my country. I haven't got the time to waste to talk about these things. These are not important. The most important thing, a blank piece of paper, the name of the brand and the indication statement, and what does it bring in terms of value for you and your patients. That's what's important. That's what they're going to remember. That's what I need them to remember. I don't need them to remember the gimmick, the image, the color necessary. I need them to remember what this brand represents. And I think, honestly, the way legislation is going and the industry is going, I think I wouldn't be surprised if we get to a point where we're not doing branding campaigns in the same way.
Right. And in your opinion or in your experience, does that resonate with how HCPs expect to be communicated?
In my experience, and again, as a customer myself, so having said everything that I've just said, it's a human tendency.
Yeah.
And one of my best leaders gave me this challenge, very, very simple task. He asked me to close my eyes. So, Kosha, close your eyes, and I will say cow to you.
Okay.
And I want you to describe, so you can open your eyes now.
Right.
And when I said cow, what did you see?
A white big animal. Yeah, with two horns and
Exactly.
four
Black
legs.
towards, okay. Fine. You saw a bull, but that's okay. But you visualize, right?
Yes.
You didn't see the letters COW.
No. Oh, yes.
You created a visualization of something. So he reminded me that people are visual and they rationalize with facts as the afterthought. So your first thing is a visualization. Now, when he gave me that lesson, that was at the time of campaigns and branding. But I learned over the years, he's absolutely right, 100%. But when I speak to oncologists, and I'm very fortunate to have worked in oncology, and I ask them about a product I was very fortunate to launch in breast cancer. And I worked on the campaign. I love the campaign. I've still got a copy of it somewhere. And when I've asked them, what's the most profound visual of this product? I'm hoping they'll say the campaign. You know what they said? And I
Yeah.
asked 5 different customers in an advisory board completely separately. They all said the same thing. There was an image presented at a congress of a brain with a tumor on it. And then 2 weeks later, the same brain and the tumor had disappeared. Phase 1 trial of one, it's one patient. And they said that image, if you could put that as your campaign, you'd convince all of us as oncologists. That's what matters. So yes, visual, but the visual was not a picture of a campaign or a person running through a field. It was what resonates to them, what they see under the microscope, what the patient feels. And he said to me that the symptomatic benefit of that. So when a brain met is that big, patients, this was a real case study. The patient was actually losing visibility. They lost sight. And he described it to say the tumor was basically pushing on the optic nerve, so the patient lost sight. And 2 weeks later, because the tumor was shrinking, the nerve was opening and they regained sight. He referred to it as a Lazarus effect. And he goes, that's the image, and that's the memory, and that's the faith and the belief I have in your product. And when a patient asks me about it, these are the sorts of anecdotes I give. I talk about, I had a patient, this is what happened to her, this is how she is. I never, ever would dream of talking to a patient about, well, the company's come up with this really cool visual. And if you look at it from this perspective, it looks like this. And if you look at it from, they would never do that. So why are we spending so much time and effort creating visuals that literally sit on an image on a screen or on a printout and end up in the bin? That's not where we should be spending our money, right? So again, progressive thinking as a marketeer, I would love for us to think more about what do our customers see and feel, because I think the resonation of that will be far higher than an abstract image where they're going to be spending more time trying to see how do I relate to that. So that would be the opportunity, I think, for marketeers and brand teams now to work in that direction.
I think my personal hypothesis is if you've got a weak story, you rely more on gimmicks. But if you've got strong science, then your science talks. You don't need to create any gimmicks because it applies to the human behavior and human psychology. We get attracted to something gimmicky, and you need the crutches of gimmicks when your science is not strong enough.
It's very, very true. Yeah, absolutely. And that's where sometimes I think you asked the question earlier in terms of what goes wrong. Where does it go wrong?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of them. Spending too much time to overcomplicate a proposition which is so simple and powerful in its own right. Let the data speak. Let the data speak. Let the patient experience speak. Create the forum for that conversation to happen. And don't over-engineering it. Most organizations I've worked in, the constant feedback is simplicity. Make it more simple. You're overcomplicating a proposition, which is actually very, very simple. And I think that's where we potentially are also, that's another pitfall I've seen with some products and some launches, especially where they overcomplicate it. They want to tell the whole story in one go. And by the time you get to the key point, your customer's lost, right? They've gone off in a tangent.
Are they only 25% of, and this is, sorry, I'm coming to the point of diversity, inclusion, and equity.
Yes.
I read somewhere that only 25% of executives or 25% of executive roles in pharma are held by women, despite women making up to nearly 70% of the healthcare workforce. And that's a massive gap. And you've been actively sponsoring women's leadership initiatives. Why is this cause so personal to you?
Yeah, no, you're right, and this is something that I feel very, very strongly about. So, and I think that in our first conversation, I referred to the fact that I am very conscious. I'm aware that I am also, yes, I'm a man, but I'm a man of color in an industry where there aren't many leaders like me, who look like me, who are like me, who have my background and stuff like that. And I don't, and there's no reason, there's no logical reason for that, because, you know, this is the society we live in. And the one about gender is exactly the same, right? If you look at the balance of the gender in our population, it should be reflected in our society, in our life, in our organizations. And that's the simple truth to look at constantly, just to challenge ourselves. Are we, now for me, and the reason I'm so passionate about this, because of the sector I work in.
Mhm.
And I've been championing this for years. And this was one of the few positives that came out from COVID, because we
Yeah.
saw the evidence for this. So the rejection rate for the vaccine was surprisingly high. If you ask general society, people were, why are people refusing this? And and remember we talked earlier about asking the next question, not just the first question. So why don't you, so you ask somebody like me, why aren't you taking the vaccine? I don't believe it's good. I don't trust it. There's not enough data. Why is there not enough data? What data have you seen?
Mm.
And then what you learn is people didn't see themselves in the trials. They didn't see themselves. And therefore, this concern that this isn't for me, people like me, became a reason. So there was a study that was done in the UK, brilliant, a heat map of where the vaccine rates is particularly low. And this is, you can find this online. And the study was highlighting that in an area in Manchester, very high prevalence of a Somalian population. And they found the uptake of the vaccine was especially low in that community.
Mm.
So NHS, with that data, went in specific effort into that community. And that's where these discussions reveal. And they didn't go to the GP surgeries. They didn't go to the clinics. They went to the community centers. They went to the mosque. They went to community gatherings, where people are coming together. And that's where this started coming through. The language, they didn't understand. The visuals weren't resonating with them. You know, every evening, Boris Johnson and the Secretary of State for Health, all of these, it is what it is, white, middle-aged men talking
Yeah.
about this just didn't resonate with people.
Mm.
So what the NHS did, which was brilliant, is they actually so they did a couple of things based on the insights. Another insight was people felt that the whole vaccine effort was an effort to document illegal migrants. So if I turn up, you're going to take my details and then you're going to deport me because maybe I didn't fill in. So this was an insight that came through because you spoke to community leaders, you spoke to people directly through themselves.
So, Uday, we talk a lot about guidelines and discipline in customer facing roles, but there's also a pressing need to make every interaction count. How do you strike the balance between ensuring calls are structured and allowing reps the freedom to build real empathetic connections, especially when people buy from people?
Another insight was people felt that the whole vaccine effort was an effort to document illegal migrants. So if I turn up, you're going to take my details and then you're going to deport me because maybe I didn't fill in. So this was an insight that came through because you spoke to community leaders, you spoke to people directly. And yes, have guidelines, have standards, but don't lose the opportunities, right? Don't lose focus on why we're in the appointment for the first. And you seem how tired they are. I've had appointments which have been postponed. I've hanging around in the coffee shop. But when you see them, your heart breaks because you think, really, it just doesn't feel right for me. You look exhausted. I've had a lot of success where I've literally just been a human and I said, I don't think you need this right now. I know, we know that still today, your gender does play a role in your success and your applications that you're making. For a man, you're a board member. Somehow you become a female board member. And she says, I'm not concerned about the giddy eye part and the baby part. I'm concerned that all this work I've put in to build my career to get to this point is going to just get lost. And I'm going to come back quickly because I can't risk taking a year or 2 years because that is really going to be terrible. And that's my driving force, is to create an environment where their gender doesn't become an aspect of their aspirations.